Welcome back, Board Game Crusaders. Today we're going to be covering Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Command. Now I know this is not the typical box you're going to see for Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Command, but in this game you really need at least 2 sets to play, and one box houses, well, 1 set. I guess if you take all the junk and the filler out, you can fit more sets in, but I found this to be a more convenient storage solution. So first I'll go over the storage solution I've chosen, in case anybody's interested. First, I just copied this stuff off of the box or off the instructions on my printer, cut it out, and Mod Podged it on. Pretty ghetto, but you know, gets the job done. Then I've done the same thing for the tops of these boxes, so you can clearly see who you're getting, and inside you've got the characters and the triangular tokens and the marker tokens for these boards, which we'll cover in a second. Extra sleeves, that's irrelevant. Just in case I do anything different with my decks, I'll have the sleeves available. These boxes are also handy. These ones I got from a tackle box section of Walmart, and just contains the treasure tokens and the wound tokens. These ones and the big one I got at Michael's, I think. And then the deck boxes from your favorite comic store. And then I matched the sleeves on colors to the faction colors there, so that I know what is what. And then I put the creature cards in different colored sleeves from the command deck. We'll cover all that stuff in a sec, no worries, no worries. The big stuff that was too big to fit inside of this is right here. And then I've got the command cards for the leaders, and then the tiles all stacked nicely there. And that's what I've chosen to do. Do what you will with it. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Command, at any time any one player has no morale or creatures at the end of their turn, the game ends, and the player with the most morale wins. Now, I prefer to go for a last man standing approach, which makes for a longer game, but I like longer games. So that's the winning condition. Here's the rest. At the beginning of the game, each player will choose a faction, and then they will choose one of the 2 leaders for the faction. This is one of the leader cards. It will have the name of the leader. It will have the leader power, that is the power that influences throughout the game. It will have the creature hand, which is, you get to draw that many creature cards at the start of the battle. That's also the maximum number of creature cards you can have in your hand, which will be more clear in a moment. The starting order hand, this is how many order cards you get at the start of the battle. Your morale, which is your victory condition, you don't want to lose this. And your leadership, which kind of dictates how many creatures you can control in a game. And you'll see that there's a starting value on each of those. You will take one of these little indicators and place it in the start range, and then keep track of your stats with that. Here we have an example of a command card. Every command card will have a level, an ability, a name, the action type, any special abilities that happen when you play this card on the creature for their activation, and the symbol representing the set that the card comes in. Now the level means that you can only play this card on a creature of that level or higher. The any, in this case, indicates you can play it on any creature. Sometimes they will have other characteristics, like this one has intelligent, which means you can only play this on a level 3 or greater that has an intelligence stat. There's also the standard. You'll also see a minor and intermediate, or immediate, excuse me, in that section. And the standard is just a common action. When you play that on a creature, the creature will tap, and you can only play one standard action on a creature to tap it. Once it's tapped, you cannot play a standard action. You can only play standard actions on your turn. Minor represents kind of like a hidden dagger or something they pull out of nowhere. You can play those even on a tapped creature, but you can only play those on your turn. Immediate represents something that you play as a response to something someone else did. Those can be played anytime on any creature, whether tapped or not, on your turn or your opponent's turn. Some of these command cards will also have an attachment ability in this section below. The reason it's in the section below is because if you do attach this to a creature, you simply put the appropriate creature above it, leaving that portion revealed, and then you can see the ability that's attached to the creature, just like that. The creature cards have a level and an ability. This one is intelligent and charismatic. I don't know. It doesn't really matter what it stands for. You just need to match it against the command cards. This one has intelligent as well. So it could be played on this creature because it's an intelligent level 3, which means it can be played on level 3 or above. It's a level 5 intelligent creature. So you could also play one that has this ability, but you would not be able to play this one because it's a level 6, and this is only a level 5 creature. The hit points here will indicate how many hit points the creature has. This one has 80 hit points before it's defeated. The range next to the bow indicates how much damage it does and how much range it has in the little parentheses. So this does 30 damage at a range of 5 or less. The sword indicates the melee damage that it does. This does 20 melee damage. Melee is next door to your figure, not anywhere further than 1 square away. This indicates any abilities that the card has or the creature has that are just active, passive, dormant. They could be used at any time, unless it says there's a special circumstance in order to use them. That, of course, is the faction that the card came in, or the expansion. That indicates which creature you're looking for when you're pulling your creatures out of the game, so you know which card matches which figure, and that represents the speed, or how far the creature can move in the board. Up at the top underneath the name, we'll also see any special characteristics. This Lich Necromancer is evil, it's a humanoid, and it's undead. Sometimes there will be cards, or command cards, that will impact special types, or sometimes there's abilities. When deploying any undead creature, you may place it in an unoccupied square adjacent to this creature. So you'll want to look at the creatures and see if it's undead to play it next to this creature, so on and so forth. The level is also important when tracking how much morale is lost when the creature is destroyed. If this Lich Necromancer was destroyed, you would lose 5 morale. Also, when looking at your leadership on your creature, if you recall, determines how many creatures you can have in play at any given time. So if your leadership is 7, you could only have him and 2 level 1s, or him and a level 2, or any combination that equals 7. So the game is going to come with everything that you need to play with one of the factions. You can divide the factions in half and play a really, really watered down version of the game, but really you need 2 sets, as I said, to make this game any good. So each set's going to come with enough of the command cards and enough of the creature cards to go. But if you do want to customize, you can combine sets or buy duplicates of a set to customize your army. When you are building your own army, there's only a couple rules to really look at. You must have at least 12 creatures. You can have as many more than that if you'd like, but at least 12, and at least 30 of the command cards. Again, you can exceed that if you'd like, but then on both the creatures and the command cards, you cannot exceed any more than 4 of a kind. So you can only have 4 Death Grips, for instance, and 4 Disciple of Caius, or so on and so forth. When coming to a game, you are going to provide 2 small pieces of terrain, the half sheets, I guess, if you will, and then 2 of the large square sheets. When you're looking at the half sheets, you'll notice one of them will be a start zone, the other one will not be a start zone. And when looking at the tiles in general, you'll see that there's an outdoors and an indoors on the reverse side. You're also going to see some characteristics, such as that little shiny star or cattle prod looking thing. That indicates that it's hazardous terrain. Hazardous terrain costs an extra movement point to move through. So if I had somebody right here, and I was going, say, to right here, and I didn't want to go around the fire for some stupid reason, I would go 1, 2, 3, 4 to get there. Or if I wanted to go here, I would go, let's say from here, I'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So each of the hazardous terrains costs an extra movement to go through. Also with the hazardous terrain, the moment you enter it, you take 10 damage. And if you end your turn in it, you take an additional 10 damage at the ending of your turn. Now at the beginning of your next turn, when you start there, you do not take the 10 damage for starting there, because that is only for entering and ending your turn in it. So at the beginning of that turn, you would not take the 10 damage, but at the end of the turn, if you were remaining there, you would take the 10 damage again. Similarly, we have these triangle marks. The triangle marks represent rough terrain that's difficult to get through. They are similar to the hazardous terrain, except they do not cost any extra damage when you're moving through or remaining in them, but they do cost an extra move. So this would be 1, 2, 3. Or from here, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. You get the picture. There's also these magic circles. Magic circles can impact the game in a variety of ways. Some of your creatures have abilities that interact with the magic circles, and they're printed on the cards. Next we have the squares. The squares indicate blocking terrain, which means that nothing can see through that terrain. It also costs an extra move action to move through. So one more time, moving from here to here, it's going to look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plain and simple. I think that's beat into your head by now. As far as the range or line of sight is concerned, if we had this kind of a scenario going on, even if this guy did have enough range to hit this skeleton, it would not be able to, because these are considered blocking the line of sight. Now, had the skeleton been right here, it'd be another story. You could still see him, but he would be considered covered, which means if he hadn't tapped, the player controlling him could decide, well, I can take the damage, or I can tap the creature card and avoid the damage because he is in cover. Another instance where cover would come into play is right over here. So let's cover line of sight briefly before moving on. Seems like as good a spot as any. So line of sight is measured from point A to point B, measuring from one corner of this to one corner of wherever you're trying to hit. And if you can do that, you have line of sight. You cannot go through walls or any of the blocking terrain like the squares. Or you also cannot go through any friendly or opposing figures when measuring line of sight. Now with line of sight, you may want a piece of string or a ruler, or hey, what the heck, why not just take one of these? It's got a straight line. You can use the white side or the other side, whatever. They give us 2 for every set. We're only using 1. So to measure the line of sight, let's go from this corner right here to this corner right here. And if you can measure to that corner right there and see that there's nothing blocking physically from that corner to that corner, you know you have clear line of sight, which means they're definitely going to be able to hit. Now if we were to rearrange the scenario a little bit, let's say from there to there, we do have clear line of sight right here from this corner to this corner. However, if you want to measure it from that corner to the upper corner, we see it's blocked by a little bit of the wall. That simply means that this guy has cover, just like he did when he was in the square tile. He can choose, if he's not tapped, to tap to avoid damage. Now, we'd be looking at a whole other scenario if he was right here for pretty obvious reasons, because you can't even get to this corner without hitting something, let alone the upper corner. Incidentally, with a larger creature like this, you would not measure, for instance, from this corner to this corner and to this corner like you may think, but it would be from this corner to, well, if he was here in these 4, it'd be this corner and this corner. You're still going off of 1 square, even if it is a 4-squared creature. And then finally there's the circle. That's just indicating where you're going to put the treasures when you set up the board. Now, you're also going to note on the outside there are these thick walls. These thick dark areas, or walls as I've already called them, are walls, and they block movement. Nothing can move through them. In fact, flying creatures can't even fly over them. When you're looking on the outside area, you're going to see these cliffs. These cliffs are identical to the walls on the inside, and even though it seems maybe a little counterintuitive, flying creatures cannot fly over the cliffs either. However, burrowing creatures can burrow under cliffs, and they can also burrow under the walls freely with no problems. Now this may go without saying, but flying creatures and burrowing creatures also get to ignore difficult terrain, hazardous terrain, obstacles, friendly figures, enemy figures, everything. Now for those of you with OCD, like me, or as I like prefer to call myself, a purist, there is right here on every tile you're going to see the name of the set that it came with. So if you're bringing your orc army into play and you want to use the tiles that came specifically with your orc army, you can do that just by referencing them. Or mix it up, there's really no rule against that. Alright, so set up the game. In a perfect world, you and your friend are each going to own your own copy. You're going to bring your own armies, you're going to bring your own tokens, so you're going to want to bring enough of these wound tokens to support your army. You're going to want to bring enough of these in the 1, 2, or 3 flavor. We're going to cover them in more detail later, so don't worry. But enough of these to cover all of your treasure parts on the maps that you bring. You're going to want to bring 2 of the large maps, 2 of the small maps, 1 of the small maps with a start zone, the other one with no start zone. And you can't really see that, it's off camera, but kind of demonstrated what those look like anyway. Once you have brought your pieces to the table, with these, really it doesn't matter again if you're bringing 1, 2s, or 3s, as long as you've got enough to cover. Later on we'll cover what they do so you'll know what your strategy is going to be if you're going to have one. I usually just bring a good balance to the table. Once you've all got your pieces, the rules don't really specify how to set the board up, as long as it matches this pattern for a 2-player game. And refer to page 15 for the 3 to 4 player game setup. The only thing it really does specify is that these dark exterior borders cannot dead end any open corridors. So, for instance, this map piece would not be able to be placed right here because it would put a bordering wall on an open space. As you can see, the pieces don't connect that way anyway, so it shouldn't really be too much of a problem. And when you're looking at the 3, 4, and 4 player map setups, you're going to notice some of them do set up like this, which is okay because the wall's backing a wall and it's not blocking anything. So that's completely fine. Of course, that same rule will also apply to the cliff faces. You can't have a cliff face up against an open area as well. Alternately, you could also set the map up like this. It doesn't necessarily have to have that pattern. That's what's indicated in the book in their demo, but you could also do something like that. As long as, again, you don't have the cliff walls or the black walls backing open areas. So just set it up so that wherever this is closest to where you're sitting, whether it be like this or whether it be the other way that I had it set up. Either way is just fine. So my train of thought on how to set this up is, since you're both supplying your own tiles, you can either just place all the tiles in a central location, you keep your start tile, they keep their start tile, and you just kind of randomly place these out, picking one at a time, or your opponent can field 1/2 and you field 1/2, and that's one that's set up with the start locations across from each other, which is what the little picture in the instruction booklet indicates, is the start positions across from each other. Or if you want to start diagonally from each other with one here and one over here, then maybe one player can set up this half and one player can set up that half. The rules are open to interpretation there as far as I could see, so have fun with it. But once you have set up the map, you gather together all of the treasure tokens that you provided, along with the treasure tokens your friend provided, flip them down, mix them up, and then they'll be randomly placed on the treasure locations. So you don't really know where which numbers are going, which is good because you don't need to yet. Kind of takes the fun out of it if you know exactly where to go for the big jewels. Once the map is completely set up, you're going to draw the creature cards and the command cards up to your starting creature and command cards based on whoever your commander is that you're using. And then you're going to want to roll a dice, a 6-sided dice, to determine the order of play and the order of setup. So in the instructions, technically it says Whoever rolls the highest gets to place their guys first. I find this redundant and ridiculous because you don't really have any strategy when placing your guys necessarily, unless you've got somebody that can deploy inside of like a magic circle at the beginning of the game. In which case, if that becomes contested, go with the highest die roll by all means, but that doesn't happen very often. Otherwise, you're just all going to want to place within the dotted lines of your start areas, and then let the highest roller begin by being the first player. Now, when you're placing your units, you need to make sure that you have at least one creature in the fray before the game begins, because we wouldn't want to lose this early on, and as you recall, that's one of the losing conditions, is if your creatures are all eliminated. So if your turn comes around and you don't have anybody out because you didn't deploy anybody in your deployment phase before the game started, you're SOL, and you just forfeited the game essentially. So what you want to do is you want to look at your leadership. Leadership is 7 for this character, so they can put creatures up to skill level 7 total in the battlefield, which means if I was playing them, I could put these 2 guys in the fray. That totals 7. Or I could put these 3 guys into the play, because that totals 7. I could not put these 3 guys into play because that exceeds 7. I could, however, just put this guy into play. It doesn't equal 7, but as long as you have 1 creature, that's all that we're going for right now. Well, that and the fact that it doesn't exceed 7, of course. Okay, so setups is done. We picked our commander. We drew our starting hand based on our creature hand and starting order hand size. We played up to 7 because that's our leadership value into the battlefield by placing them on the board in our start position. And now it's time to move on to phase 1. Phase 1 is the refresh phase. In the refresh phase, first and foremost, you're going to resolve any start of the turn effects, if there are any start of the turn effects that apply. After resolving the start of the turn effects, you untap all tapped creatures. So if on your previous turn you had somebody that had to tap, meaning to turn it sideways, indicating that it had used something that it can't use a duplicate of, then you do untap that, meaning that it's able to be used again this turn. And I'll kind of go over which abilities require tapping and which ones don't as we go through the abilities. Now there are some events that require a creature not untap. If that's the case, obviously you don't untap. But after you have done your untapping and everything, you draw one of your command cards and place it to your hand. Now with the command cards, you do not have a hand limit. You can draw and hold as many as you'd like in your hand. It doesn't matter. However, if you do end up going through the deck, then you do not reshuffle the discards in or anything like that. This is all you get for the duration of the game. So use it sparingly. Same with the creature cards. Those are all you get through the duration of the game. If you kill them all off, then you might find yourself in a sticky position. Next is phase 2, the activate phase. In the activation phase, you can do any or all of the following. You can move, you can play order cards, you can use one or more of your creature's powers, and you can take other actions. Now, to kind of go over that all individualized, you can move all of your creatures in any order that you see fit. Movement does not cause the creature card to tap. You can move straight or diagonally, but you cannot move diagonally around corners. So this guy, for instance, we're just ignoring all of the terrain that is hindering. You know about that. We're just demonstrating movement specifically. So this guy, for instance, would go 1, 2. He could not go diagonally here because it is a wall or a cliff if it was the outside. However, he could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So diagonal works anywhere except where there is a wall or a cliff. Large creature movement is very straightforward. Basically, if this large creature were to move, he would not go like this. He would go 1 square at a time. So 1, there's a square, 2, 3, 4. And that's how the large creatures move. Now you can move before or after other actions, including ones that cause you to tap, but you cannot interrupt a movement with another action. So if this guy wanted to say, for instance, move 1, 2, do a ranged attack, and then move, that does not happen, because you cannot interrupt your movement with an action. Now you would be able to move, and then attack, and then you're done with your movement, because you've just attacked. But, or if he was right here, he could attack, and then he could move. But you cannot move, attack, and then continue moving. You can also move through an allied unit, but you cannot stop in any square where another unit is. So this guy, for instance, could go 1, 2, 3, 4, and be okay. But if he moved his movement, ended his movement right here, he couldn't because there was another unit there. But you can move through friendly figures. Not only can you not move through enemy figures, but you have to cease movement if you're in any of the squares immediately surrounding the enemy. So this guy would go 1, 2, he would have to stop immediately. And then, let's say my turn is over. Well, he'd have to stop his movement. He could still attack if he wanted to, or do any other sort of action, but he would have to stop his movement immediately. And then let's move on and say that it's this guy's turn. If you're starting your turn next to an enemy creature, no matter what your movement value says on your card or your speed, you can only move 1 square. So this guy, beginning his turn next to an enemy unit, may only move 1 square. And then continue whatever else. Or, if you would rather, he could attack this unit, try to defeat this unit. If he does defeat this unit, he's no longer hindered, and he can make his full range of movement. There is a special movement called a slide. Slide is an ability that some creatures have. They slide when they move. Or there's cards that can allow you to cause a unit to slide. If it's a card that causes a unit to slide, it does not have to be your unit. It can be an enemy unit, it could be a friendly unit. It doesn't matter. And units that are sliding will ignore enemy units. So if this unit was sliding, he would be able to just go and not be stopped or interrupted. Another movement type that can allow you to ignore enemies is the shift movement type. If a creature has the shift movement type, it can also ignore enemies and just continue on by with no problem. So that pretty well covers movement. The next option is to play 1 or more of your order cards from your hand. That basically happens as I've outlined earlier, with one addition. If the card has an affinity, it can basically ignore all of the requirements if played on a creature type that shares that affinity. So for instance, this web has a spider affinity. That means if you're playing this on a spider creature, which even though this says giant spider, that's just the name. The creature type, again, is a reference down here, where this is a beast spider. So this has an affinity to spiders, meaning you can play this card using any of your spiders without, for instance, making sure that there's intelligence. So this is intelligence, the spider's not intelligent, but the spider can still cast the web because it has a spider affinity. And again, that's not only ignoring these factors, but it's also ignoring the level. Just play it freely. Also, a creature may have as many attached cards as you see fit on it. So, for instance, this spider could have this attached to it. It could also have this attached to it, and so on and so forth. In fact, it can have multiples of the same thing attached to it, if you feel so inclined. Let's say these two creatures are right next to each other. That would put, just for instance, reference of the card, these two creatures next to each other. And let's say I wanted to play, let's say this, level 6 sneak attack that requires dexterity. And I wanted to play it on the Drow House Guard. The Drow House Guard by himself, or even the Umber Hulk, neither of them can have this played because it's a level 6 card. Neither of them are level 6. They both meet the dexterity fact, however. So what you can do if you would like to have a supporting creature, as many creatures are next to the creature you want to attach that to. So say I want to put this on this Drow House Elf, or House Guard. All I would have to do is use their combined power, so that could be essentially a level 7 with dexterity and intelligence considered to be on the Drow Elf. All I have to do is tap any card that wants to help support it. And you can do this with multiple multiple figures. So in this instance I just have the 2 because that's all I needed, but if I had maybe, let's say that sneak attack required intelligence, and I had a level 1 character with intelligence I wanted to add to the fray, I could also tap that creature, as long as it's adjacent to the creature I want to impact. So that is one of the abilities that causes tapping. Another thing that we kind of already mentioned is evading attacks. That can cause tapping. Just another example of something else that causes tapping. Another action that you can choose to utilize is using one or more of your creature's powers. This includes attacking. Attacking is a power, so you can do a ranged or a close attack. Or you can do anything else on here, such as this confusion gaze. Now if it has this little symbol right here on either the creature abilities or any of the command cards, then it does require you to again tap, indicating you cannot do anything else that requires a card to tap. You can only use one tap item and then as many others as you'd like. That's another option you have, is to use those. Not all of those abilities will cause a tap, some of them do. And you can use any number of those abilities or anything that does not require tapping. And in fact, once a creature is tapped, it can still do any number of things that don't require tapping. You just can only use any tapping ability one time. So it can either evade, or it can perform that action, or it can perform one of the command card actions, which causes a tap, again referenced by that little symbol right there that looks like an arrow pointing downward in a circle. There are several other actions that you can take, such as revealing treasure, taking treasure, or anything else that may require an action that I didn't previously mention. Those are the ones that the rules outline. There may be something else that comes up. Let's go over the revealing and taking treasures right now. Revealing a treasure does not require a tap. Taking a treasure does require a tap. So let's say that this elf is right here and they want to reveal that treasure. Well, first off, they'd have to move one more square because you can't reveal a treasure until you're on this treasure space. So if you're on the treasure space, you want to reveal the treasure. As a free action, you may do so. You flip the treasure over, you see that as a treasure value of 3. So then what you will do is you will take however many that number is, in this case 3, of these bad boys, and you will place them right there. And then remove this from the map. It's served its usefulness. So now you're sitting pretty on top of a pile of treasure. So now what you can do, if you want to tap your creature, again, it's not tapped. If it has not performed a tap action, you can tap it, turn it sideways, and then collect one of the treasures. Treasures are pretty useful things. Treasures will allow you to gain 1 morale. So if you did gather that treasure and tap your creature, then you come over here to your tracker and you move your morale up to 14. So it's kind of like a good way of healing yourself, since morale is your victory condition. You want to keep your morale and destroy your opponent's morale. So now let's go into the fun that is attacking. For a close combat, you must be adjacent to your enemy, and you have to tap your attacker. So in this case, he could not attack because he gathered treasure. Let's pretend like we didn't gather treasure. We'll rewind all that, and we'll say he is going to now attack. He'll have to tap his creature after declaring, or before declaring the target. You tap it, then you declare its target, and then resolve any command cards. So if they have any evades or dodge or anything like that, they can play that now, and then you just tap your creature for nothing, sadly. After you've resolved command cards, if the attack is still going to proceed, then you deal damage. This step is quite simple and straightforward. You simply look at how much damage your creature does. In this case, I'm doing a melee attack, which does 20 damage. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather a couple of these 10s, and I would then place them on the card representing the enemy, such as this card represents my character. I'd find the enemy creature card, which unfortunately I haven't pulled out. Let's just pretend like this is it. And you just place these ever so delicately on the card like that. After dealing damage, you look at the creature to see if they're still alive. In this case, this vampire that I attacked had a health of 80. We did 20 damage, so it still has a good 60 left. So it's still alive, nothing to worry about there. However, had it been defeated, then you would look at the morale of the character who was controlling that creature, and they would lose 1 point for every 10 of health lost. So in an 80, you'd lose 8, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the really powerful creatures are really powerful and really cool, unless you happen to lose them, and then it can be pretty devastating. Now, when you're being attacked and you are taking damage, you have an alternate option. You can cower. If you're going to cower, your creature avoids all damage that would be dealt to it. However, if you do cower, then bad things can still happen to you. Let's say, for instance, we'll just pull this orc leader, even though it's not realistic to the creature we're attacking. Let's say that that human decided they wanted to cower instead of take the damage. That human would then go to their leader sheet, and for every 10 damage that they would take, they move down. So in this case, 20 damage would move down 2 morale. And the catch-22 with this is, if my creature had done 50 damage, let's say 30 damage would have been enough to kill that human I was attacking, but I was dealing 50 damage. If the creature were to just take the damage and die, it would take 30 damage and then die, and the rest of the damage would disappear. It would be an overkill. But if they wanted to cower, even though that creature only had the capacity to take 30 damage, and you're dealing 50, then the cowering player would have to take 5 morale from his chart, because that's the amount of damage you dealt, regardless of how much damage the creature was able to take. Of course, a ranged attack works in the same way, except it's from a distance. This creature happens to have a ranged attack indicated by the bow here, a range of 5 that does 10 damage. So as long as it's within 5 squares, which it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, and within line of sight, which we already covered, then the ranged combat can proceed. Alright, phase 2 is now done, with one little piece of clarification. Even though moving does not require tapping, unlike other moves and actions that don't require tapping, you can only move once. So even though it doesn't require a tap, you can't move, and then move, and then move, and then move. I think that goes without saying, but I did want to clarify that here, just to make sure it's completely clear. So now we move on to phase 3, which is the deploy creatures phase. The beginning of phase 3, before you deploy creatures, you move your leadership up 1. So as of now, I've been able to have 7 level in creatures out. I've had a 5 and a 2. Now I'm an 8. If I chose to, I could deploy this creature into my start zone. Or I could just hold off and wait a couple more turns until my level is high enough to play this level 3 creature. It's your discretion at this point. That's phase 3. Phase 4 is you resolve any end of turn effects. Some of those may cause your creatures to not be able to untap, or so on, but you resolve any of those. You untap all of your creatures that are able, which should be all of them unless there's something specifically played on them requiring they don't. You draw back up to your creature hand size. So at the beginning of the game I played 2 creatures. I can now draw 2 more creatures to total my hand size, which as we recall is 4. You can't see it, but 4. And then you check for ending game conditions, meaning your opponents have no creatures on the field, or your opponents have no morale. Or perhaps you have no morale or no creatures. If that is the case, in any case, the game is over and you determine the victor by last man standing rules. Well, that is the game, and it's a pretty fun game, so enjoy it.